All right, Matt. Welcome back to No Dumb Questions. Good to hear from you. How you doing?
I'm super. Thanks for the welcome back to the podcast I co-host.
Yeah, I know. I'm just trying to make it weird. That laughing you hear in the background, that is our Minister of Culture, Dalen Woodall, correspondent of all things culturally significant.
How's it going, guys?
Super. And that means it's going to be a good episode.
Yeah,
because Dalen's here.
Fingers crossed.
Dalen's awesome. The thing is, Dalen has prepared something very interesting today, and the fun part is you have no idea what it is. I do know what it is. I had actually heard about this particular story. I'll call it a story, Dalen. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I've heard about this before. So you're the one that's going to be coming up to speed on all this. It is fascinating. So take it away, man. Let's fill Matt in on what we're going to learn about today.
So, Matt, I have a really simple question for you to start.
Okay.
What do you get when you combine a national economic crisis, the unique sociology of a small town, and a notorious town bully?
The plot to Back to the Future.
Not quite. You get this profoundly interesting story that's covered in a book called In Broad Daylight about a town bully named Ken Rex McElroy. The setting that we'll be discussing happens in a town called Skidmore, Missouri. Skidmore is about 90 minutes north of Kansas City. In the most recent census, there were 284 people who lived in Skidmore. At the time where our story takes place, there were 437 people who lived in Skidmore. And just for a little bit of context, I've never been to Skidmore. I've never been to Kansas City, but I discovered this in the course of researching this story. Missouri is a mostly agricultural state. That's going to figure into our story. Missouri leads the nation, top 10 nationwide in producing soybeans, corn, cotton, and rice. So we're looking at a small rural agricultural area. Not a lot of money. In 1980, the average American made $12,543, and it's probably a little bit less than that at the time where our story's taking place. For a little bit more context, the 1980s also features what would be called the farm crisis, which was a speculative bubble that ruined little tiny rural towns like Skidmore.
Are you reading this? Like, are you reading this right now, or are you like preaching?
A little bit of both.
I was like, man, that was like an information vomit. That was amazing.
Okay, information vomit in a good way?
Yeah.
It was crispy in a good way.
Okay, great.
In a good way. Okay. So Skidmore, Missouri, just to make sure I'm with you on everything here. We're talking about 1980.
1980.
What part of 1980? Early summer? Fall?
Early 1980. In terms of the year, probably happens in the fall, based on the information that I have. I could be wrong.
So we got
about
some
that.
tension coming up there too, because we've got a presidential election. Carter v. Reagan is just about to happen in November.
Right.
And we've got, we're coming out of the gas crisis era.
Absolutely.
People are on edge. It was before the boom of the 80s.
Right.
And so there was some real question about what America's position in the world was going to look like, how that would affect small town America. I don't know much about Skidmore, Missouri, but I'm guessing that was on their radar at that moment as well.
Absolutely. When you think about the national climate of the country, it's at a time of insecurity and instability because of markets, because of the election, because of just what's kind of happening, what's in the air at the time. And when you look at that kind of insecurity and quasi-instability, it feels a little bit like now. But that's the setting for our story. Did you have something you wanted to add, Dustin?
I got you a date, boss. It is July 10th, 1981.
Okay. All right.
So, 81. Okay, so Reagan has been sworn in 6 months earlier, and people don't know what they're going to get with this actor from California. And you got Cold War pressure.
Right.
Okay, I can picture it.
Right.
I really was paying attention, my friend. I really was, I promise. But Skidmore, you said, was south or north of Kansas City?
90 minutes north of Kansas City is what I have here.
So just on the Missouri side, almost to Nebraska then.
Right.
So we're almost far enough north that we would have Nebraska City on the other side of the river.
Right.
So it's near St. Joseph, Missouri.
Right.
Okay.
And you could speak to this because you're a little bit more familiar with the geography, but that's a thoroughly kind of rural and agrarian part of the nation. Is that right?
Yeah, the hills are still a little bit rolling from the way the Missouri River moves through there, and there's a corridor on, what would that be, I-29 between Kansas City and Omaha. In fact, for a while there was a minor league, major league relationship between those two communities. And so, yeah, people hustle and buzz back and forth there. But if they're anything like me, they've been back and forth on that road a ton, but never really been off the interstate. So a town like Skidmore is just some little dot that you see off in the distance in farmland.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this story so completely fascinating, that it happens in a place that we would rightfully describe as a dot that you see somewhere out in farmland. And we've kind of set the context of 1980, what's happening in the country, what's happening in the air, the economic situation that's affecting not only the country broadly, but small towns, small rural towns like Skidmore specifically. But here we come to the central character of this narrative.
Okay.
It's a man named Ken Rex McElroy, who's born in 1943. He's one of over a dozen children. He drops out of high school in the 8th grade, never learns to read and write, and goes almost immediately into a life of crime. The most legitimate thing that McElroy does is raise hunting dogs, but there are conflicting accounts as to how legal that operation was in terms of the methodology that he used to train these animals. And over the course of the next 10 years, McElroy will become nothing short of the town menace. He would pull up in the dead of night and rob the livestock, the hogs, and the chickens, and anything that he could get his hand on from farmers in this rural and in this poor area. He was all but confirmed to have burned down the house of a young lady in the community named Trina McLeod. In 1976, McElroy was reported to have shot a man in the town named Romaine Henry in the stomach. Henry survived. But McElroy wasn't convicted for this crime.
Oh, there's something to that, Dalen. Can I add a little bit of color to this palette here?
Absolutely.
So when he says this person was shot in the stomach, like he rolls up to him, he's in the truck, and he lays the gun over his lap, and he imagine you're in the driver's seat. McElroy comes up to the side of the vehicle, lays the gun in your lap, essentially, blows off the flesh from your stomach, shooting to your side, shooting from your right to your left. That happened.
Why?
Yeah, he was just trying to terrorize people. He was trying to assert himself as the dominant force in the town. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. The only thing I would take issue with, Destin, is he wasn't trying. He had effectively terrorized this town, and not only had he effectively terrorized this town, but he was able to successfully time and time again slip out of any legal recourse or legal ramifications because he had hired an attorney named Richard McFadden. And McFadden was reputed to be a skilled defense attorney, and McFadden understood the legal codes and the legal systems to such a degree that he would use every legal maneuver available to get McElroy out of trouble every time.
And you getting hung up on that raises a question for me.
Okay.
These guys are both Scots. I mean, ethnic immigration to the American Midwest is an actual thing. So my question is,
no, I don't.
What do you?
No.
No, I'm serious though. You all are laughing. Dalen,
Yes,
you'll vouch. I just went and did a video at a church that is in the same. Okay, how can I put this? It's in the same era, the same chronological longitude of settlement of the United States.
Okay.
Right. So in the 1770s, you're just getting into Ohio.
Right.
In the early 1800s, you're getting into Illinois.
Right.
And so I just was in the same vertical belt of westward expansion as what's the name of the town that we're talking about here? It's
Skidmore, Missouri.
Skidmore. I was thinking Skidmark. And so Skidmore, Missouri is just like this town I was just in. They conducted their services in German until about 1950.
Right.
And so you've got these little enclaves of Scots, of Germans, of Vikings from effectively Kansas City all the way up north to Canada.
Right.
That's why the Minnesota Vikings are the Minnesota Vikings.
Right.
It's all Scandinavians who settled up there.
Right.
But in some of these places, you actually do have European ethnic tension between groups that came over facing different pressures, and they're still Scottish.
Oh, that's absolutely
still German.
That's absolutely right. They live in these communal enclaves because you sort of look at the time in our country's history. There's not a tremendous amount of travel in terms of people from coast to coast. You still have families that have been in these communities for generations. So you have large sort of groups of people that are certain ethnic groups living in areas with other groups of people that are different ethnic groups, and that kind of frames the conflict. This place isn't well settled in the 80s. So just imagine what it would have been like during the height of immigration to this country in the early 18 and 1900s.
So was there some good old boys Scottish protectionism? Was that the dominant enclave? Or is it just a coincidence that these guys both happen to have that kind of last name?
I think in this story it's a coincidence because McElroy, again, is the bane of the town's existence. So there isn't any good old boy protectionism as much as you have this legal outmaneuvering by Richard McFadden, his attorney. He's just someone what's
McFadden get out of the deal? If everybody hates the guy, wouldn't that ruin McFadden's reputation?
Money.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I use that to buy goods and services all the time.
So what would happen is you basically have the situation where McElroy is robbing the town blind by stealing livestock, and again, in this incredibly impoverished rural area, he's selling it to people that are either from outside the area or don't really care enough about doing ethical business and enriching himself, and using that money to pay his attorney to get him out of trouble time and time again. And his attorney is, someone with not seemingly a lot of scruples, to the extent that he would refuse the money and the financial proceeds from this kind of a client. He's someone with not a tremendous amount of professional or ethical scruples, as he's presented in all of the accounts that I've read. And so he uses every legal maneuver that he can to constantly get McElroy out of trouble, having hearings postponed and delayed, having the trial moved to towns where people were not familiar with his basic reign of terror in Skidmore. And time again, this guy gets through the grasp of the legal system.
21 times, in fact. Like he was indicted 21 times, and he escaped conviction every single time except for the last one. But for me,
and these aren't petty crimes. It's like shooting off somebody's belly fat.
So listen to this. So, Dalen, with your permission, I don't want to hijack what you got going on here.
No, go ahead,
you've done all the research. But do you think it would make sense to give a voice to these people from the past and let Matt hear some of that?
Absolutely.
Okay, so here's what we've got, Matt. There was some really good journalism done back in the day, and you can actually hear the voices of these people trying to explain what McElroy was doing to the town. And so what I'd like to do here is play you a little bit of one of these clips. This is the guy that was shot by McElroy, and I just want you to hear what he has to say. It's unbelievable. So here we go.
So this is not some weird way of you cueing me to do a Barnacles and Testicles thing.
No.
You actually have a video here.
Yeah, we actually have video. And by the way, we do have a name for Dalen when the time comes when he does enter one of the Barnacles and Testicles skits. Dalen, would you like to tell Matt what your name is going to be? Because we figured that out the other day.
Isosceles Jenkins.
Isosceles.
There's a story.
Barnacles, Testicles, and Isosceles. Get Matt into a coughing fit. Okay, here we go. Here's a little bit of the journalist. This is from an old 60 Minutes special back in 1981, if I believe. I may be wrong about that, but this was aired, and listen to this.
The town of Skidmore than just the story of a local bully and frightened townspeople. What it represents is a classic conflict of rights in a democratic society. The right that even the worst among us has to freely move about, and the right that a community has to be protected from the worst among us. In the case of McElroy versus Skidmore, that conflict could not be more bitter. There's Romaine Henry's story. He's a farmer who says he was stopped on a country road by McElroy, who accused Henry of spying on him. And then
he said, well, you're a lying SOB. And when he said that, well, then he more or less laid the barrel of that shotgun right against my stomach and pulled the trigger. And when he did, why, Of course, it laid my flesh all open and blew my flesh into this door here.
Another shot hit Henry in the face. While the gunman was reloading, Henry managed to drive away. There was a trial. 2 witnesses claimed McElroy was elsewhere at the time of the shooting, and he was found not guilty. How can he get witnesses to do that?
Well, I suppose that, I don't know, but I suppose probably money had a little something to do with it.
He told me last winter, when he shot the dirty son of a bitch, that was Romaine Henry, he thought he had him shot deep enough that he'd die before he got home.
He told you that?
He told me that himself just last winter. And his brother...
Why didn't you come forward?
What for? Why should I tell that when they made such a fool out of the man that they shot?
There was Ernest Bowenkamp. He's a man of 71 who, along with his wife Lois, operates the town grocery store. There was some bad blood between McElroy and the Bowenkamps over a piece of penny candy. One day, McElroy turned up at the loading bay behind the store where Mr. Bowenkamp was sitting, watching the world go by.
Turned around while I was looking down the double-barrel shotgun. And I thought to myself, now, is he going to shoot or is he just going to scare me? So I thought if he was going to shoot, I better dodge over. So I dodged over just in time. He got at least my neck. And that's all that story, because I was out the rest of the time.
This episode of No Dumb Questions is sponsored by Raycon. I have a treat for you today, Matt.
I'm excited. I'm ready. Yes.
All right, here we go. I've got a brand new box of Raycon, the everyday earbuds. I'm going to open this right here in front of you. You can hear this. It's here. Get my knife, cut in the box here. All right. Ooh, they have new packaging, dude. I got some new ones because I wanted the USB-C connector in the latest and greatest. They have an engineering drawing here. I can tell you that the diameter of the little earbud on the outside is 1.56 centimeters, and it's 2.15 centimeters tall. That's cool. I like engineering graphics. It's like they were marketing this to me by putting the little engineering drawings on there. Oh, we got a USB-C connector here. We have lights on the outside of the pill now. I don't know if you knew that. Oh, dude.
Did not knew that.
Yes. It's got 4 green LED lights that tells you if the pill itself is charged up, and I'm opening it up. They have a little bitty, like, lanyard thing. It's nice, dude. You know what I like about this? So here's the deal. Like, I have a Mac computer. It's got a USB-C charger. Unplugging it right now, the charger from my Mac. Mm-hmm. Boom. Mm-hmm. Plugging it up to the Raycon charger, and now it's charging my Raycons. Like the USB-C
Well, it's surely not
adapter.
the same charger.
Yeah, the same.
That's impossible.
It's happening.
The very
right
same
now.
one.
The very same one. USB-C, all the things. I like this. All right, so basically, Raycons are earbuds. They're Bluetooth earbuds that you can use, and they're just like your everyday carry. And Matt has tried to destroy his all different ways. What's your favorite way you've tried to destroy your Raycons?
Falling on my butt on some slippery algae into a trout stream, and then looking around real quick as I stand up soaking wet head to toe, making sure nobody saw, and then caring so little about that dignity that I then announce it into a microphone in front of all these people.
Yeah, didn't break, right? Got him?
No, didn't miss a beat.
I have washed mine. Not allowed to say that. They don't say that they withstand that, but they do withstand that because I've done that. So they're a great product. I love them. Raycons, you can get them by going to buyraycon.com/NDQ. That's BUYRAYCON as in November.com/NDQ. You'll get 15% off your order. They've got a little promo code that comes up there. Fantastic stuff. You should totally get them.
I also like that they sound good. That's important to me when it comes to earbuds. I like my music to sound awesome. And for my money, these things sound great, except it doesn't cost me as much of my money when compared to the other premium audio brands. They sound great, and it starts at like half the price to get into a pair of these, which again makes me feel less guilty about my constant attempts to wreck them. I also continue to find the little magnet suction clip-in thing really satisfying. Can you do that real quick with the new pair so I can hear it?
Okay, yes, here we go. Do you feel it? I kind of touched the thing. I'm going to do them.
Yeah.
I'm going to do both at one time. Ready?
Okay, yeah.
That's it. And now I'm going to shut the case. if you get it close, they just kind of jump in their little home. They know what to do.
They just know what to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me give you a point of contrast here. As we record this, I'm using a pair of studio monitor headphones that have been in the family for probably decades. So they're a little bit bigger. And as best as I can tell, I don't think they're magnetic. So what I've got here is a large plastic box, and I'm just going to see if these snap into it when I put them close. Just hang on a second.
Yeah, go for it. Let's see if this works.
They do not. No, they don't at all. They just fall.
You're an
They
idiot.
just fall onto the ground
You're an idiot.
really loudly. They didn't stick in there at all.
I really like you as an idiot, though. Okay, here we go. Here we go. I'm going to click mine in again. Boom. Just works. Boom. In the pocket they go.
Here's mine. Nope, nothing.
BuyRaycon.com/NDQ. Get 15% off your order. Thank you for supporting the podcast. You're going to love these things. All right, looking at my stats here, I have run well over 300 miles this year wearing my everyday earbuds. These things are great. They haven't fallen out. I love them.
Thanks for supporting Raycon, because when you do that, it supports us. Let's get back to the conversation.
So I want to put this in a context now that we've sort of talked about our main character, and we've sort of talked about how what he's doing to terrorize this town. The fact that it's happening in a little town like Skidmore is unique, because in preparation for this podcast, I did some reading and some research on how small town America is different socially and in terms of the values that you typically see in small towns compared to other places in America, specifically larger, more metropolis kinds of places. Robert Withnow is a Princeton scholar who wrote a book called The Left Behind: Decline and Rage in Rural America. And in this book, he talks about how in small towns, things like moral order, interrelationships, loyalty, a sense of obligation, a sense of social contract, and shared identity seems to be more important and more prominent in small towns compared to in larger cities where people live a more nebulous kind of existence. There's more of a social contract, more of a social fabric, more of a understanding of how everyone's living in community with one another. And what McElroy is doing day by day over the course of his career as a public menace is completely ripping this social fabric apart. He's completely transgressing all of the norms sort of shared in this small community, and according to Withnow, usually factor more into the identity of small communities. And that kind of begins to set up the landscape for the next few movements of this story. What did you guys think about this research about small towns and how their values and their understanding of themselves and their thinking about social contract kind of plays into this story so far?
I've lived in small towns a big chunk of my life, and I'm struggling with that analysis a little bit. When did that research come out?
I think that was 2020.
Interesting.
I'll double check and make sure, though.
I do feel like that's shifting. The age of the internet is shifting small town values, and the internet, in a way, I think is going to reinvigorate small towns. Certainly the exodus is happening right now from big back to small, where even 10 years ago we were all lamenting the end of small town America.
Correction, that was 2018, Matt. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, still in the zip code.
Yeah.
So there are things that when they happen in a small town, at a school or in the neighborhood, it just feels like it doesn't count. If somebody's a bully or somebody's a jerk, you'd never hear that on the news. It's never legitimized with serious coverage or things like that. It's just your own little thing. Nobody's coming to help you. You have to sort the thing out within that little social circle. That's very much my experience growing up.
And I'm from a small town too, Matt. And it's really interesting that we both have lived in small towns, and I'm from a small town. And we have kind of a different purchase on this, right? Because it's certainly not covered in terms of being nationally significant on the news. If you're from a small town, you kind of get used to not seeing yourself on the weather report and in the news. But what's unique about this story and what resonates with me about growing up in a small town is when something happens that's transgressive in a small town within that community, it creates shockwaves. It may never be mentioned on the 5 o'clock news. It may never be mentioned anywhere else outside the context of that small town. But in that small town, when you break the social contract, when you contravene whatever the norms are, it has a seismic effect within that community.
Yes. There was a massive incident at a town that I won't disclose in the American South that happened in the early 1990s. And I just had a conversation with somebody about it. And I mean, it was horrible, a horrible, evil, awful tragedy. But I went to verify it, third party, thinking this would be all over the news. And it was not.
Right.
It did send shockwaves through that community. And the person I talked to said, no, you would just need to call people there. Everybody would remember the day. Everybody will remember the story and the names. But in the age of the internet, I couldn't find any reference to it anywhere.
That's what is so interesting about this story to me. But Destin, when you think about what Wuth now says in his research or what we've covered so far in this story, how does that fit together for you?
There's this little town in South Alabama called Gordo that I used to go to in the summers, and it was just different. Everything was different than, I would say I grew up in a, we say small town Alabama, but compared to Skidmore, I live in a metropolis.
Right.
So I think there's degrees of this I don't really understand. I'm used to playing the all shucks, I'm from a small town card, but I don't think that works here because I think there's something else that you're talking about. I think I could quickly speak beyond my depth, and I should probably just listen here.
Well, yeah, Destin, I'm actually familiar with Gordo. I grew up in a town a lot like Gordo. When you look at what he's doing to terrorize this town, being from a small town, to me, I could scarcely put in words what it must have been like to be in this community and everyone sort of know that there's someone wreaking the kind of havoc on the moral order, that there's someone who is so openly and frequently breaking down a sense of what it means to be a neighbor, a sense of what it means to be a member of that community, this idea of mutual responsibility and mutual concern. There's someone literally living in a town that has these values who completely represents the antithesis of all of these values. And I think, again, that kind of presents what's going to happen in the next movement of our lesson. I want to give some more kind of academic context for this. According to a Pew Research Center study on social trust, small towns are more trusting, and people from small towns are more apt to trust, and people from small towns are incentivized to trust, usually as a benefit of more productive and more positive interpersonal relationships with people. Because that's been my experience. Has that been your experience, Matt?
Yes, very much so. Also, I would say, in addition to more likely to trust, more likely to gossip, and then just have to get over it when you bloody somebody else's lip. And for the most part, you live in one of three places in a small town. You have to have trust with everybody because you just can't fully burn those bridges. You might need each other.
You can't afford to. You literally can't afford to. There's a kind of social fabric that's almost self-preserving or has this kind of quality of resilience to it where you have to mend fences, you have to fix relationships, you have to iron out disagreements and disturbances because the fabric of the community is literally at stake if you don't. Was that kind of what you felt at all during your time in Gordo or around Gordo, Destin? These people kind of have to get along with each other because they're all in this one town with one stoplight?
I didn't really, and I think it was because I was a kid, and I didn't understand the complex social dynamic that was going on. But as I hear you speak, it reminds me of the 15 years I spent working in the small group that was the missile range where I worked.
Right.
And we've got 30 to 50 people, and we're with each other all the time.
Right.
We're on the road with each other. And you have to iron out the conflict. You have to say, "Hey, this person can't be trusted." And oh, by the way, we're handing each other explosives, and we have to trust each other. So that person can't be trusted. And so all these types of things you're talking about ring true. I just didn't learn them in a small town.
Sure. And that brings me very neatly, as a matter of fact, to the next bit of research that I'll cite before we move on with our narrative. Sebastian Junger, who most famously wrote a book called The Perfect Storm, wrote another book called Tribe. And it's a book of sociology about how people live together in groups. And he explores the effect of tribe and how we initially developed sociologically to live in these smaller groups. And then the groups got bigger. The groups became communities. The communities became cities. And through the course of the book, he explores the implication of living in these really large arrangements when we were more adapted for living in smaller arrangements. And he says in his book, there's a effect of undergoing stress and strain in a group. And he says that what happens when a society experiences collapse, or what happens when a society experiences any kind of stress or strain, is people are forced to live and relate to each other in a more communal way in order to survive and in order to overcome whatever the stress and the strain is. That's kind of what you were describing in your work environment, right? The work that you were doing was so stressful that it necessitated repairing any strain in the relationship, right? And so what Junger says that I think is so interesting is when people are in a stressful situation and people are living in close proximity with one another, and there's a threat, that the community has to figure out a way to respond to the threat.
Yeah, I just recently read an article about the West Virginia coal wars.
Okay.
Have you heard about these?
I haven't.
So just after World War I in West Virginia, it was literally a battle between the coal miners and the companies that ran the coal mines.
Okay.
And when I say battle, I mean rifles.
I have heard about this. There's a great riot song called "Whose Side Are You On?" Have you heard that?
I haven't. No.
It's a great song. It's a riot song.
Sing it.
There's a joke here somewhere. I just don't know what it is.
It's a protest song. It's beautiful. It's fantastic. And I think it was written, I think, in response to that. In the chorus of the song, they're actually like calling out one of those big industrial bosses, and basically the refrain of the song is, "Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on? Are you on the side of this wealthy industrialist that's trying to basically push us into serfdom, or are you on the side of the noble-minded sort of strikers that are trying to respond to this economic serfdom or slavery that's being foisted upon us?" I think it was in response to that.
Yeah, just Google the Battle of Blair Mountain. It's its own thing, something to talk about later.
Yeah, but I mean that's an example of a specific community, right, having something that it understands and intuits as a threat that it needs to respond to. Matt, what do you think about Junger's sort of synthesis of how stress and strain and calamity forces people to kind of come together and adapt and figure out how to get over certain existential threats to groups and communities?
Every single movie that has a ragtag motley crew of disparate characters exemplifies this age-old principle.
Right.
The common enemy, it causes people to come together, to overlook differences, to identify with the one thing we have in common. That's what I've found very troubling about these most recent Olympics.
Right.
Is the common enemy is every other country who's trying to get a medal. And normally this is like the moment where everybody's like, well, stars and stripes, go get them. I've not picked up on that vibe this time around. Different tribes are rooting against different athletes who are maybe a little indicative of a side they don't like,
sure,
or political persuasion they don't like. It's weird. So, yeah, you see it when it happens, and you know what it's like to pick on your brother constantly, and then somebody at school is picking on my brother. I don't think so. And all of a sudden, my brothers and I we're as tight as can be, and we're going to push back on that common enemy. And you take that outside pressure away, and we'll get back to beating on each other.
Well, you really make a profoundly interesting point, Matt, about what a group is willing to do when they identify a common enemy. Because the next movement in our story starts with a quote that I want to read from a story about Skidmore, Missouri, and the McElroy saga that begins like this. If anyone could drive a normally peaceful community to cover up a murder, it was Ken McElroy. The D&G Tavern opened, and out stepped Ken Rex McElroy, a bulky man with a ragged pair of sunburns and a piercing stare. To someone passing through the town, McElroy might have looked like a strong farmhand, a callous good old boy. But to locals, his reign had come to an end. McElroy knew about the town's hostility toward him. He simply didn't care. And that morning he was out on bond walking the streets of Skidmore. And as he moved from the tavern and opened the driver's side door to his Chevy Silverado, he said nothing to the 30-odd residents who stood nearby or watched at a gas station just up the hill. His wife, Trina, climbed into the passenger seat. Trina looked around behind them, and she was the first to see one of the rifles that a man in the crowd was hoisting up to shoulder level. She heard the rear window of the Silverado shatter, and her husband slumped over the seat. In seconds, Ken McElroy, the terror of Skidmore, would be dead, and all the people gathered around would claim to have seen nothing. So we talked about this community and how it's unique, and a little bit about how the sociology of a small town is unique. We talked about how transgressive Ken McElroy was being in terms of ripping up the fabric of that community. We talked about how time and time again, using the legal system and his attorney, he was able to slip and slide away from any meaningful consequence. And the story gets to a point where the town takes what they feel is justice into their own hands, and they shot him. And to this very day, no witness in the town has come forward to admit that they saw the vigilante killing of Ken Rex McElroy.
So what do you think, Dalen, about me playing for Matt, Trina's account of this, what happened at that day outside the D&G lounge? What do you think about me just playing it for him? Let's see what he says.
Absolutely.
All right, cool. Let me do that. So something to know is the town had called a meeting over at the VFW, and they were trying to figure out what they were going to do about this, and then he rolls into town and starts making some threats. And so here we go.
Skidmore was outraged by what the town regarded as a slap on the wrist for such a brutal attack, and then further outraged when McElroy was freed on appeal after posting a $40,000 bond. Skidmore felt once again that McElroy had beaten the system. Then one day, along comes McElroy into the D&G Tavern, followed by Trina, who's carrying a carbine and a bayonet. Allegedly, McElroy picks up both and starts showing off and boasting that he's going to finish off Mr. Bowenkamp. Now, if that happened, it was a clear violation of his bond arrangement, and a number of citizens signed a complaint to that effect. A hearing is called to see if his bond should be revoked. It is scheduled for July 10th, 1981. The town also calls a meeting for July 10th at the American Legion Hall to form a group to attend the bond revocation hearing. But word comes that the hearing's been postponed for 10 days. They discuss how to protect the people who signed the complaint against McElroy. Someone announces McElroy's in town, drinking at the D&G bar. Most of the people walk over to the bar.
We left the D&G and went to our pickup. And as soon as we walked out the door, everybody else walked out the door behind us. And they gathered around on my side over here, on my passenger side of the truck. He hadn't started the pickup yet. We just sitting there. I looked at them to see what they was looking at, and see if they wanted anything, and they were just staring.
High noon in Skidmore, Missouri, on a hot, dusty day last July. There is a tension, a sense of showdown in the air.
I seen the man go across the street, go to his pickup, take the gun out, and I seen him shoot it.
A number of shots were fired. Exactly how many can't be determined. 15 minutes later, sheriff's deputies arrived to find the street empty and Ken Rex McElroy dead. There may have been as many as a dozen people outside the D&G and around McElroy's pickup at the time of the shooting. Or there may have been as many as 50 or 60 people. And yet not a single person admits to seeing who fired the shots. No witnesses. How come no witnesses?
Everybody died for cover?
At least 5 shots fired.
Depends who you talk to.
Those two people that were just talking there, they were not at the scene. The man that said depends on who you talk to, that's the pastor in the town. So the pastor in the town, he also has a beef with McElroy. Like earlier, McElroy shows up with a gun, and I'll just let you hear what the pastor had to say earlier about McElroy.
Would disagree. He's a friend of Bowenkamp, and just before McElroy's trial for the shooting of Ernest Bowenkamp, Warren says McElroy and Trina turned up at Warren's church armed with a machine gun.
I noticed that he and Trina were out of the truck, and he had the machine gun out and in his hand, and I had a gun with me. I didn't want to use it, but if the man would have put a clip in that gun, I would have used it to protect my family.
That's a minister. And so you had all these town people around the table, and they're like, why were there no witnesses? And they're like, I don't know.
They're like a bunch of kids covering for each other. I mean, it's funny because it's a podcast, so nobody in the third chair can see their expressions. But it's not this somber meeting of a bunch of people trying to talk about why there were no witnesses. They're all like, yeah, well, weird.
Absolutely.
What are you going to do?
In the same way that McElroy's sort of reign of terror in this community creates a certain kind of solidarity in terms of the people deciding, hey, we're going to have to mount some kind of response. And they try the legal response using the letter of the law. They try to get this guy arrested and say, hey, he's not behaving in a way that's consistent with the terms of his probation. There's the same sort of solidarity around the silence about what happened to him. And it's a profoundly complicated and interesting sort of scene. So when you sort of arrange all of these facts together, it's a really interesting picture. It's this community that's clearly economically destitute, being hit by a crisis and a catastrophe. And then there's a guy wreaking havoc on their ability to sort of sustain themselves. There are not a lot of people here. There's not a lot of money here. There's a lot of farming in this community. There's a lot of subsistence agriculture in this community. And there's this guy that's profoundly impacting their ability to get through their life as a community. And then ultimately the community responds in this way.
Murder. To be
yeah,
I mean, yes, it's a response, air quotes, but it's murder.
It is murder. Absolutely. It's vigilante justice.
As a man from the American West, yes, it's murder. Also, that's kind of frontier justice. I mean, it wasn't too many years before that happened that legally was how you solved that kind of problem. I live right next to Deadwood, South Dakota. The trial and retrial, or trial and failed trial of Jack McCall for shooting Bill Hickok in the back of the head, there wasn't a legal structure to resolve the problem. I mean, this Jack McCall clown just walked into the number 9 saloon,
right?
Number 10,
right?
And just put a gun in the back of Bill Hickok's head.
Shot him in the back of the head while he was playing cards.
Aces and eights, brother.
Right, dead man's hand, yeah.
Everybody saw it happen. And then he fled, and the trial didn't quite work. And they're like, yeah, no, everybody knows you did it, and that's not how we're going to do things, and we'll just handle it then. And the people just handled it, and that was it for Jack McCall. I'm not saying that was necessarily right, but the historian in me notes that there's an exchange between people and the governments that people build, and that exchange is government gives people something, people give government something. And people might disagree about how much that ratio should be or what a fair deal is between the individual and the state. I'm not going there. All I'm saying is that one of the things that a government has to give back to make that deal sustainable is justice. And if a government cannot provide that, people will eventually have it occur to them that they're just going to have to do it themselves. Like, we just can't live like this.
That's one of the interesting parts of this story. People reaching that conclusion is a sociological inevitability.
Yes.
Like, there's no indication in any of the research or in any of the writing about this that they just had a meeting and they said, we're going to kill him. But this is a town that has a existential threat and has been failed by the levers of power and the responsibility of the government. And murder is the response. Vigilante murder, to be sure, that's illegal and against the law for good reason, is how they resolve that issue.
This is epiphanizing for me. But think about the way they did the killing. It's the same mechanism as a government. I mean, a government isn't a thing. It's not a person. It's a bunch of people agreeing that we're going to play by these ground rules. And then the government, which is it's just paperwork, it's just an organization, that does things on behalf of individuals that they're not allowed to do by themselves. So, for example, I can't go tax my neighbor even if I feel really strongly about a policy I think should be enacted. I can't go over there with a gun and be like, no, I need 12% of your income because I have this idea. But with a government, kind of we've agreed societally that we can metaphorically go over there to the neighbor with a gun and say, I need 12% of your income because we all agree on this strongly enough that we're going to do it. Again, no judgment as to the morality or lack thereof of that. Death penalty and punishment, same way. You're not allowed to go and punish your neighbor when there's no imminent threat. We've agreed that we're going to outsource that responsibility that none of us on our own possess. I can't go strike someone, injure someone, shoot someone to punish them for bad behavior. But if I live in a town of 100 people or a small state of a few thousand people, the way law works, we can somehow all come together and give ourselves that collective right to do it. So isn't it interesting that in this spontaneous moment of crowd justice, they did the exact same thing? They felt the instinct to distribute the burden of that death sentence amongst themselves, so no individual would have to bear the moral burden of, I went and killed that guy. It's like the stabbing of Julius Caesar. No, we're all putting one knife in.
Right.
We're all taking ownership of this. And if they did that without planning, what an interesting thing that says about human nature and our notions of collective justice.
And this isn't the only place in history where this happens. But there's another incident that happens in Alabama, in Ellick City, Alabama, where a very similar thing happens to a person that had proven themselves to be an existential threat to the community. And in the town, the aftermath of this is still 30 some odd years later. No one's ever come forward. No one's ever come forward and said, this is who did the shooting. This is who was there. That distribution of responsibility, as you articulated, Matt, it continues to hold very firm some 30 some odd years later, even after all of the reporting and even after all of the journalism and even after all of the research. It's sort of been agreed upon not only as the method for responding to the issue of McElroy's reign of terror, but the method for kind of solidarity in terms of holding on to that instance in the community.
This episode of No Dumb Questions is sponsored by HelloFresh. You can go to HelloFresh.com/IndyQ14 and use the code IndyQ14 for 14 free meals, including free shipping. We love HelloFresh. Matt, tell them why.
Because it makes you good at cooking when you thought you weren't any good at cooking. And then after you get done cooking the thing, it turns out that it was delicious. So not only do you feel more competent, but you ate something that tasted good. Double win.
I appreciate the enthusiasm. You sound like a kid that's like got something really excited that you want to talk about it so much, but words are slowing you down.
Brother, there's a reason we keep working with these people. And it's because every time I do this, I feel like I should get a prize that goes on the refrigerator.
I do too.
I made a thing. Look, I did the thing. And I want to show people, and I'm proud to serve it to my kids and be like, look, your dad is competent. I made a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's how it works. So
believe in me.
HelloFresh, you can go to the website when you sign up, and there's like 50 menu items each week, and there's everything from like vegetarian meals, if that's your thing, craft burgers, extra special gourmet options, all kinds of stuff. You pick the meal you want. They put all the ingredients in a shipment. They send it to your house. You get it like at your door, and it goes from the farm to you in less than a week. It's all fresh stuff, and you get to cook it using the special recipe card. It's amazing.
It is really easy to get into the restaurant rut where you close your eyes and you picture your town like a buffet. And you're like, if I go to that end, I could get these things. If I go over there, I get these things. And you can start to feel despair. Like, I sort of get it. It's all kind of the same thing, and it runs together. HelloFresh is the exact opposite. It is the relief from the mundanity of eating the same thing all the time.
Dude, that was like poetry. You're on fire today, man. I don't know what the deal is.
I just want my kids to be proud of me someday.
Is mundanity a word?
No!
Okay, it's not. I'm from Alabama. You have to keep me in check. You say something like that, I'm going to believe it. Anyway, HelloFresh is amazing. We know you're smart. You get it. You know that supporting the sponsor supports the podcast, and we're grateful for that. So thank you for considering going to HelloFresh.com/NDQ14 and using NDQ14 at checkout for 14 free meals plus free shipping. We're super grateful.
We like HelloFresh, and we like you, and we're really, really happy for the opportunity to put the two of you together.
Seriously, thank you. One thing I want to point out about this murder, we'll call it, is that it didn't just happen in the absence of government. There was an authority that tried to get involved at one point, and McElroy was successful in intimidating that person away. It was a local guy that represented the police force, and he was basically told at gunpoint, like, hey,
you don't want to do this.
You don't want to do this. So listen to this. This is you're literally going to see the face of the guy on this report. We can leave a clip down in the video description. You're going to see the face of the guy that was supposed to go up against McElroy and what he did in that case.
The only real law enforcement is 12 miles away, and by the time the sheriff could get a car to Skidmore, McElroy would be gone. Most people felt that the legal system allowed McElroy to get away with what amounted to a reign of terror.
You say the system allowed him to harass the town. Mr. McElroy was working within that system.
It may not be the letter of the law, but the spirit of our law is that one is protected from men like McElroy.
All right. You had the sheriff's department. You had the state highway patrol. You had, at one time, you did have a marshal in Skidmore, Missouri.
Why don't you have a marshal?
The marshal resigned.
Why did he resign?
And I do not know why he resigned.
You know darn well why he resigned. He resigned. We are told, and I think you have been told as well, he resigned because Ken Rex McElroy put a gun in his head.
Up at the bar one night, he caught me coming outside and pulled a gun out and was holding it there, and he asked me if I was going to testify against him. I told him I'd have to go over because I was a marshal.
David Dunbar was marshal, but for only 6 months. He was to be a witness in the Bowenkamp shooting. After this encounter with McElroy, he quit the job and went into business wiring up houses for cable TV.
He said that he would believe in killing a man that wanted to put him in the pen for the rest of his life. And
were you frightened of him that night?
Yeah, I sure was. Anytime you're looking at a gun, you don't know if he's going to shoot you or what he's even thinking. He may have just been trying to scare me. But he did the job.
But every time I tried a case, there were all kinds of witnesses. I never could see anybody that was intimidated. And the jury, 12 people, decided he was not guilty. That's our system.
Well, that's how intimidation works, is you never see people who've been intimidated.
My goodness, this lawyer, judge guy, who am I looking at right now?
That's an attorney. That's his attorney.
This is
McFadden.
McFadden, right.
Looks like Boss Hogg, doesn't he?
He looks a lot like Boss Hogg.
He looks like a character in a movie or a TV show who's an obstinate pile of turd who's just obfuscating and an obvious liar. He's a caricature. I can't believe this is an actual human.
I will say this, just to clear the name of Boss Hogg, the guy that played Boss Hogg in the Dukes of Hazzard was actually very intelligent and very kind. He spoke Japanese and everything. I just feel the need to clear the air of Sorrel Book. I had to look that guy up. He was an actor. He died in 1994. Apparently, he was super intelligent. This McFadden guy should not be equated to the wonderful actor Sorrel Book.
The more you know.
I accept your note. Yeah, this is an absolute joke, though. Listen to what he's saying. He's using, his plausible deniability. Bob, I never saw anybody who looked intimidated. Well, they never saw anybody put a bullet in your client. So I guess nobody saw anything. If you want to play by those ground rules, you got to admit, though I am against shooting people, it's kind of cathartic to have that kind of nonsense and that kind of mockery of justice rationale be articulated in broad daylight. I mean, he's just flaunting the needs of this community, flaunting justice, and they come back and they're like, all right, two can play at that game.
Right, and he's skating the responsibility of the law and of the legal system in protecting people. Go ahead, Dustin.
My point in showing that is that there was a marshal. They tried to go the legal route. They tried to get this guy to testify, and then McElroy shows up, puts a gun in his face, and he's like, yeah, dude, I was scared, so I'm a young man. I quit. I mean, at least the Dunbar guy is honest. I mean, the marshal, I mean, I don't know that he did the right thing, but at least he was honest, and we have that information now. So I don't know. What do you think about what the marshal did? Because if he was elected or appointed by the people to represent the law in this community agreement, as you describe it, to enforce a certain set of rules and values, if that guy said when it got hard, he's like, no, I'm out. I'm not going to be doing that. Like, what does that tell you about this town? What does that tell you about the guy? I mean, where are you at on that?
Well, I think what the marshal did is indicative of the failure of justice. He just absconded. You know, he was derelict of duty. He just gave up on his responsibility to represent the law and represent justice and represent process to these people. And unfortunately, I think it shows how tenuous the law can be and law and order can be when you don't have people in law and order that are committed to doing justice and that are willing to sacrifice, in order to do justice.
Government is paperwork. The paperwork only counts if people are actually behind it. Now, look, wherever you land in the world politically, you're still looking at the last 5 or 6 years of American history from whatever your perspective is going, how did that party and those leaders how did they do that? You can't do that. Those aren't the rules. You can't do that. Yeah, you can't just make that illegal. That office there can't make that rule. Whoa, didn't the Supreme Court say this? You can't do this if they said that. I mean, it's been a rash of this kind of stuff in the last 5 or 6 years. And the lesson that we are all receiving gradually over this strange stretch in our history is political will is reality. The rest is paperwork. And if you've got all the paperwork in the world, that's great. But if the functional reality of what the people want isn't actually behind the paperwork means effectively nothing, and you can just flaunt it and ignore it. And in this case, yeah, there was legal paperwork that said you can't do that and you can't do that. But this guy and his attorney, the McFadden and McElroy, were willing to completely flaunt it. They didn't care about the paperwork. You got some kid. I mean, how old was that kid? 22, the marshal? I mean, he's a very young man at this point. It doesn't look like he's getting backed up by anybody. This is 12 miles away from the station. He's there on his own trying to enforce some paperwork that, I mean, all it takes is one trigger pull and he's gone. The paperwork be damned. Who cares about that? And so he runs a real natural equation.
Well, McElroy represents a political philosophy too, right? He represents the philosophy of chaos and anarchy.
Yes.
And
just do and make the other person stop you.
Of right. Well, what's typically articulated as might makes right, and there has to be this is what ultimately sews this story up for me. There'll always be a response on the behalf of a community to people who contravene and break up the norms and the basis of acceptability in that community. And the response of a community will either be acceptance, and for a while this community accepted this reign of terror, and they accepted the impact that he had on their lives economically, socially, in every sense. And that response will either be acceptance or rejection. And ultimately, that's what plays out in this story. And it happens in an odd way and in a strange way and in an odd little town that doesn't represent most of America. But it kind of echoes something that I think kind of has a universality to it.
That issue of political will, whether we're talking about a few hundred people in a little town or an entire civilization, that issue of what the body politic will accept, what the people will accept, comes down to one equation that a friend of mine articulates all the time. People will act when the cost and risks of staying with the status quo outweigh the cost and risks of trying to make a change. People will accept a whole lot of ick because they know it, and they will endure it, will put up with it, will hope that the paperwork will work, that the right person will come along, and most of the time I think people are vindicated with that. Usually, Law and Order, the long play, is going to work out. There's a reason we're talking about the story, because it's an outlier.
Right.
It's a fascinating anomaly. Normally, the legal system is going to come together. We're going to figure it out. We're going to expose this clown attorney. But here you've got the right mix of time and geography and culture and access to firearms and poverty and all of these things. Just, it's a perfect storm that adds up to someone being able to push and push and push and push until the legal constraints just aren't able to get it done. And then it seemed like that inflection point just happened in mass. There was a moment of mass clarity where everybody said, the risk of all of us walking out here and shooting him and then saying we didn't do it and didn't see anything, I'd rather deal with that risk than deal with the risk of continuing to have that guy run around.
Can you imagine that moment? Like, that had to happen. There was a moment where they all signed a contract, a non-written contract, and they signed it in blood.
Right.
They looked at each other and they're like, hey, Wayne, we're going all the way here, and I got to know that you're with me until we die. We're going to end this right now because we have wives, we have children, we are
a community.
Yes.
And we have a responsibility to each other.
Yeah, and
Yes.
and people are going to come in here, and they're going to try to put one of us in jail, and we all have to sign this contract now. And then they looked around the crowd, and they're like, every set of eyes in this crowd right now has to agree to this, because you've heard the saying, two can keep a secret if one is dead.
Right.
And so,
Yeah.
or three can keep a secret if two is dead, whatever it is. I mean, like, this is the rare case where they said, hey, this is a really big deal, and you're in, and you got to be all the way in. Like, what does that look like? I've never been in a position like that. Like, what do you do? What?
You and I elected to carry out some shenanigans one time, and we swore all the people that we invited to participate to lifelong secrecy until we die, and I have kept that promise. I have alluded to a shenanigan, but everybody involved from my side of the equation has maintained their silence on the specifics of what those shenanigans were.
Well, great job telling everybody about
What
it.
shenanigans are you talking about?
You don't remember the shenanigans? Tina, this is going to have to go away. No one can know this. Can you mute Dalen real quick?
I can't. No, I can't. Well, actually,
Yeah, you can.
hold on, wait. Dalen, can you hear?
No.
Why did you respond?
Oh wait, I'm sorry. I was reading your lips. I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead. I've got his headphones off. What shenanigans?
We swore those kids
Oh,
we swore both of our kids to eternal
Dalen can know
blood-pact
this.
secrecy.
Dalen can know this.
What is it? What's going on?
All right, so...
but if we were going to agree to tell him, we had to do that together, away from Dalen. I couldn't executive make that decision for the two of us. It's a blood pact.
Okay, all right, so here's the deal. So we can say this, right?
I've decided yes.
I've decided yes as well.
All right.
So our kids were in town, or Matt's kids were in town, and we're like, our kids don't have the childhood that we had.
That's how most great stories start, when dads are involved.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
How did we get here? We were talking about a murder in a small town, Skidmore.
Well, we talked
Missouri.
about the blood oath covenant to keep things under wraps.
So, do you think someone is going to come clean, like on their deathbed in Skidmore?
No, I don't think so. So we've talked about it sort of socially and sociologically. We talked about it like legally. There's a philosophical component to it, right? There's a really well-known quote. All it takes for evil to prosper is for good men to do nothing. And what's really interesting in this story is an unjust society makes people themselves unjust, because like no one would agree that vigilante murder is a good idea, or that vigilante murder is the appropriate, like the most ideal response to solving our issues and solving the problems. But it's a profoundly unjust society that makes this maybe slightly less unjust response seem like the right thing to do.
Is it unjust?
I think objectively vigilante murder is wrong, right?
No, that's not what I asked.
Okay. Is it unjust?
Yeah, what is justice? I'm the only non-minister on the line here. So what is justice?
I think that justice has to have its rootage in God's ideas, because we're fallen and we're sinful, right? And I think that justice isn't retaliation when we read the New Testament.
I don't think what they did was retaliation.
Oh, say more.
Well, why do we have punishment in society?
Right.
Let's just run that exercises. What do you hope? Incarceration. I'm against the death penalty, but let's just go with a harsh incarceration. What do you hope to achieve with that as a society?
Change. You hope that the person that did the grievance would experience some form of change, and the offense would not happen again in the future.
Yeah, and you hope to discourage that kind of behavior more broadly.
Ah, yeah. Yeah, so there's a public component, like, hey, look at what this person had to experience. Therefore, there is a consequence that everyone knows about.
Right.
You're also upholding moral norms.
Right.
So that people's brains don't break. Dalen, you made a great point. I'll summarize it a little differently. If you allow society to become dirty water, well, everybody's in society, and now everybody's swimming in dirty water.
Right.
By merit of your existence, if you allow society to spiral and fail, you're consigning everyone to this state of lifelong, dark, Mad Max-style guilt.
Absolutely.
Just by merit of the fact there's nowhere else to go, and there's nothing else to be a part of.
And that's what happened, not just on that day in Skidmore, but during the course of his life, during the course of McElroy's life, that happens. Society becomes unjust because the systems and structures designed to help it remain just and fair and equitable fail. And it produces this, to use your language, Matt, this pool of dirty water.
And if the water's where you live, you got the dirt on you too.
Right.
This episode of No Dumb Questions is brought to you by Dalen Woodall's new book.
I know this guy named Dalen Woodall. You may have heard of him. In fact, he's on this podcast, and he's an author. Yeah, what's up? Dalen, you wrote a book. What's it about? What's it called? Where do I get it? Blah, blah, blah.
Faces in the Crowd Around the Cross is about some of the minor characters in the Passion narrative, in the crucifixion narrative, and ultimately in the resurrection narrative. It's about the kinds of characters that are minor, in the sense that we don't spend a lot of time talking about them, and a lot's not written about them. But I take the position in the book that although they're minor characters, they give us some major insight when we spend some time with them.
So all the people who've decided already that they're going to go and get this book and support you, where do they need to go? How do they do it?
They can go to gracepublish.org and order it there from the bookshop. You can get to the bookshop by clicking on the menu button at the upper right-hand corner of the website.
Okay, so I'm looking at gracepublish.org. I'm looking at the bookshop. I see your book. I see a digital download, and I see like a physical book. I'm going to ask a completely personal question. Which one supports you more, physical copy or the digital download?
The physical copy does.
Okay. And Dalen, I ordered this, and it came to my house, and you signed it affectionately to my pseudonym, Josiah Pennywhistle. So you're mailing them out of your house? Is that what's happening here?
Yes, I'm handling them. Yeah, I'm mailing them.
How is that? Is that hard?
No, it's really cool. It's a huge honor when I'm able to put a book in the mail for somebody and sign it to them. This is my first book, and to be personally involved in that process is really cool. It's been really cool to see the different parts of the country that they've gone to as well, and kind of see where people are reading my book. It's been really neat.
Congrats. It's a huge accomplishment. All ribbon you and stuff aside, it's a huge accomplishment.
I really appreciate your support, guys.
So do you sign every book?
I do.
Do you really?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yep.
Sweet. Go get Faces in the Crowd Around the Cross by Dalen Woodall, gracepublish.org. Support our buddy Dalen. That's awesome.
Thanks, guys.
So, okay, what are the reasons we have again for why we punish people in society? One was hope for change in the individual.
Right.
I mean, a life sentence, that's not as much the goal.
Right.
Reform.
Right.
Like, either way, we've decided you're just out of the game.
Two, to
forever.
discourage that kind of behavior.
So, a deterrent.
Yeah.
The third is to
uphold a sense of moral normalcy.
Yes. I would say number 4 is satisfaction of a debt for the offended,
right?
So that they don't go and collect on that debt themselves.
Yeah, justice is also about a sense of balance. They really capture this in the Truth and Reconciliation movement in South Africa. Maybe that's another podcast, but are you familiar with that, Dustin?
No.
Matt, are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Are you talking about apartheid?
After apartheid.
After.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've read a little bit. Well, I didn't read. I know some of the Boer people, and I've heard of a little bit of the stuff that went down after apartheid.
Well,
some of it was good. Some of it was very bad.
Well, according to most sort of historians and political theorists, there was no good reason that you didn't have like open warfare and a bloodbath in South Africa after apartheid. And according to a lot of credible historians and scholars, what prevented that from happening, or what went a long way in preventing that from happening, was the movement of Truth and Reconciliation. And what happened in Truth and Reconciliation is the people that were a part of the apartheid system, they had open ceremonies where they came forward and they said, I was a part of the system. Here's what I did. The people who were guilty, the people who were culpable. They said, I was a part of the system, and here's what I did. And the people who were aggrieved and affected and offended, they came forward and they publicly said, you've acknowledged where you were wrong. You've acknowledged what you did. You've acknowledged your complicity in this unjust system. I forgive you. And it sort of centered on the philosophy that an unjust system makes everyone unjust. It's the just thing to do if you're suffering, to respond and be civilly disobedient, like Thoreau says. And it's the just thing to do if you're the person that's causing the injustice, to stop. Go ahead, Matt.
It was a great way to resolve that problem. And if it hadn't worked, you would have had that justice would have been extracted some other way,
right?
It did work, and that's the ideal solution. I did wrong. I acknowledge you're wrong.
I don't know that it did completely work. I have some farmer friends that said some of the farms were taken, like orchards, and instead of the farms perpetuating, like the trees that were bearing fruit, they were cut down and sold for firewood. And they're like, "What the heck?"
Oh yeah, it
got weird.
Yeah, it's recent. By no means a perfect system, and South Africa now is by no means like a Shangri-La of justice and equality. But I think we could say that it was effective in preventing massive bloodshed.
Right,
that didn't happen.
And that speaks to the fifth point of why we have punitive systems. That fifth point is to avert chaos.
Right.
You let stuff go and let stuff go and let stuff go, it'll break. Now, I'm going to say things for probably the second or third time in this conversation. This is going to offend somebody, and I really don't mean to. But my goodness, you look at the disparity between how alarmed some people are about the riots, some of which were peaceful. Well, they're not riots if they're peaceful. The peaceable assemblies, I don't think people have a gripe with. The burning things, the destroying buildings, the chaos of last summer. Some people have no problem with what happened at the Capitol and every bit of problem with that. There's a whole other segment of society that has massive problem with what went on January 6th, but absolutely no problem with torching and looting a Target. That's absolutely fine. What you have there in both situations, though, is 50%-ish of the country, or at least a 20% radical distribution at the end of the bell curve each way, saying, this is not just, this is bullcrap. And they might be dead wrong, they might be dead right. That's not my point here. They looked at it and said, that's bullcrap, and I'm taking to the streets. And people who weren't a part of that group looked at it and said, yeah, it's crazy. But no matter how you slice it, last year, with all of the tensions, all of the pressures, and a larger percentage than usual of people feeling like the system's broken, this is not just from one perspective or another, you saw an abnormally large amount of people taking matters into their own hands, and state actors and law enforcement kind of going, I don't know what you want us to do. The people are doing whatever the people are going to do. We'll try to keep it together. And so that fifth reason that ideally you want some sort of agreed upon arbiter, call it the government, to hand down punishment and ensure justice for victims, you'd rather solve that with cool heads in an agreed upon setting than handle that with Bastille Day style chaos every time something goes wrong.
You'd rather do it constructively, right? Because historically, there's so many examples of this, but there's something in human nature that strives for a sense of balance. And there's something that's, when there's injustice or when there's perceived imbalance or inequity, there's something in human nature that wants to correct it, that wants to fix it. So you need a process, and you need a system, and that system needs to be fair, and that system needs to be equitable, or else you're going to have chaos. When that system breaks down, when that structure breaks down, when that process breaks down, when wrongs and issues are not redressed, like in Skidmore, to kind of bring it home, you're going to have these kinds of responses that are less than ideal. A great deal less than ideal.
Generally, you won't have great outcomes.
Right.
Look, we've talked about Anthony Ray Hinton. We know what the history of broken racial justice looks like. We get that. The evidence is right in front of us. We got a multitude of stories of that going completely sideways. So please do not mishear me and hear me somehow saying that if you have the government do it, this is always going to work. I don't think that. And sometimes the people need to rise up and say that was an injustice and it needs to be addressed, because that wasn't an outlier.
Right.
This has just become who we are, and we're not going to accept this broken system.
Well, that's what the civil rights movement is about, right?
Yes.
Is people rising up in response to a society that's profoundly perpetuating injustice.
Yes. Yes. That's where you want those kind of uprisings to occur. But the thing that's amazing about the civil rights movement is the character at the head of the whole thing is like, look, this could quickly spiral into we meet violence and injustice with new violence and different injustice. And so the doctor at the head of the entire thing from the beginning frames out this approach that says we're going to be the thing we want to see happen, which is, I think, so much of where the power was in that movement. Whereas this is more of just a one-off thing. You got a dude in town who's a turd and he's hurting people. He's practically killed people. He's going to kill people. He's menacing everyone. He's a time bomb. No one will do anything about it. We're not looking for societal change. We're not looking at some systemic institutional problem. We live in the sticks. Nobody's coming to help us. There's an opportunity here to do something. Let's do something. Singular problem.
There's a singular problem, right, compared to a systematic problem.
Yeah.
There's a problem that's sort of bound to one person as opposed to a problem being endemic in a people or a nation,
Do you think what happened at Skidmore was moral? Did they do the right thing or a right thing by shooting Ken Rex McElroy?
I think they did the best thing that they felt like they could do. I mean, again, a unjust and unfair society produces outcomes that we can't call just and fair. They were sort of put into a situation where the most ideal response to a broken system was a response that we would consider as being morally broken.
Dustin, what do you think?
I think they did what they needed to do in the moment to protect lives in the town.
Matt, what do you think?
I think in that moment they became the government. The government is whatever is the will of the people. In that moment they became that. I don't like the death penalty. So I'm not sure what their non-lethal recourse is there. In a PG movie, you go and you punch the guy a couple times, he gets a bloody nose, and you're like, don't ever come around here again.
Right.
And then it turns out he's a big coward. And he's like, oh,
yeah,
I'm
start
sorry.
talking
And then
to,
it ends.
right?
And yeah, and that works.
Yeah.
In this situation, let me say this. The failure of the state in this situation put those people in a horrible moral position where this is right next door to not the death penalty and basic self-defense. I am for violence in the name of immediate, imminent threat and self-defense. I would exercise violence out of self-defense. I am not at ease with the death penalty. So the question is, which one was this? Was this imminent enough that you could consider it self-defense? Or did they carry out a death sentence against someone, judge, jury, executioner in about 15 seconds of thought, and then agree to stand by their decision?
How amazing would it have been to been surrounding that truck after the events and just listened to the conversation?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Well, dadgummit, Bob, guess that's over with. Well, all right.
Well,
so
I mean,
they're
anybody
12
see what
miles
happened?
away. Deputies on the way. How do we handle this? Well, somebody get
Sun was
Trina,
in my
shut her
eyes.
up. Let's go. How did they do that?
Well, and so during the shooting, I kind of accidentally omitted this detail. During the shooting, someone opened the door of the truck and got Trina out of the truck and put her in a bank to kind of keep her safe and kind of keep her out of the melee.
But think about that. How could they have done that without careful positioning so that she was never downrange?
Right.
They had to have known who was going to shoot and from which direction if somebody was going to be able to safely go over there and pull her out.
Right. Right.
There's a smart person at the head of this. They're smart. They're smart in many different ways. They're strategic. They have respect in the town. And
Are we solving this mystery right now?
no, we're not. But there's a leader.
But we could watch that video and figure out who it's not.
All right, let's listen. Let's go back to around the table. These people at the table were not at the shooting, but they very much. I kind of think they know who it was.
I think I do too. I really do think the lady knows. My money's on the lady in terms of knowing.
Yeah, I think so. Let's listen to him again here.
Kevin? At least 5 shots fired.
Depends who you talk to.
Are you surprised that there are no witnesses?
No.
Tim Warren, Lois and Ernest Bowenkamp, and Romaine Henry. None of them were present at the shooting, and no one who was there, including the mayor of Skidmore, would talk to us. A grand jury was convened and came up with no indictment. A person or persons unknown killed the man. Tell me something. Are you glad he's gone?
I would say we're all resting a lot better now, knowing that the man is not here.
If they catch somebody, and he's tried, and he's found guilty, would you feel that justice has been done?
No. No,
This
because
is
there's
Trina.
no town.
That's
you take
Trina.
McFadden,
The
you
lawyer.
take the lawyer, and you take the courts. It wasn't the town that killed McElroy. It was them. That's the way I feel.
For not locking him up.
Well, yes.
What they did was worse than anything they could say about him. They went outside that system of justice, and they took the law in their own hands, in my opinion. And they decided they were going to get rid of him.
Do you want to know who did it?
No.
No?
Would you turn in the person who did it if you had absolute proof they did it?
No, absolutely not.
Would you, preacher?
No, I wouldn't.
Doesn't that bother your conscience a bit?
No, because there's a verse in the Old Testament that says, "Whosoever sheddeth man's blood by man, so shall his blood be shed."
The murder of Ken Rex McElroy remains unsolved. In theory, the investigation continues, but as far as we can determine, there is very little hope of a break in the case. Trina McElroy, they say, has offered a $10,000 reward, but so far, no takers. Through lawyer McFadden, she's signed a movie deal, of course. As for Skidmore, no one is talking whether they have anything to say or not. They now feel secure, but they are still uneasy, for among them now, there is a murderer. The American judicial system failed in Skidmore, Missouri. It failed twice.
Yeah, I think they're sleeping uneasy, right? Right. Among them's a murderer. I don't think those people feel that way.
No,
I don't think
so either.
No. And again, I go back to the Ides of March, 44 BC. There's a reason that all the conspirators got in one blade's worth of stab at minimum. They were all going to be complicit. I don't think there's a murderer in Skidmore when that 60 Minutes guy is there doing the story. I think there's at least 5, maybe 10. And they did it in such a way that nobody could say exactly who even did it.
Now, when Caesar was killed, did all the conspirators stab him, or is that just the way Shakespeare wrote it?
Even Brutus. Yeah.
Well, I mean, like, I understand that was written by Shakespeare, but is there like an external source?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The ancient Roman historians.
How many of them were there? They dipped their knives or in his blood too, right? I mean, to ultimately show that they did it.
Well, yes, they went right out and announced to the world, this is what we did.
Right.
Wow.
I mean, it was unapologetic. And the guy who led it, Marcus Junius Brutus, was like the grandson of the guy who deposed the last tyrant when the Republic was in peril. And so they followed a playbook from even earlier that they would say was the same moral conundrum.
And it put them in a situation where they felt like that was what they had to do. That was their responsibility.
You know what I think is interesting here? In the battle in West Virginia where the coal miners went up against the businesses, it was veterans that actually led the charge. It was basically they saw a lady and her children get thrown out in the street by a company in broad daylight while the guy was at work. And a couple of veterans from World War I, they were like, oh no. And they organized, and they just took them on. The meeting that was called before McElroy was killed was at the VFW.
Yeah.
The Veterans of Foreign Wars. The town, they're right across the street from the D&G Tavern. And so I wonder if there's this is 81, I wonder if there's somebody that was in Vietnam, the timing would work out. I wonder if there was somebody that was from that war or from Korea even that figured it out. My grandfather ran a bulldozer off of his property one time with an M1 carbine. Somebody was taking down trees they shouldn't have, and his first response was, okay, time to get my carbine from back in my Korea days and go run that bulldozer off the property. And so I wonder if you had a couple of veterans that bowed up.
I'm from a small town, so I know a lot of people from small towns, but I know a lot of veterans from small towns. When you look at the situation a few generations ago, the economic situation, I know a lot of people who signed up and went to war not only for their country, but for, economic reasons, because they could make a living, as a soldier. And then when you sort of lay that against this kind of town, where there are, I think it's perfectly reasonable to assume that there's some veterans in Skidmore.
This is a fascinating historical, moral, social exercise. And I think it's okay on the one level for us to look at it as observers and just think about the nuts and bolts. And this was super instructive. It's super well prepared, by the way, Dalen. Thank you very, very much for all of the work you put into it. But I also think it's okay after we've done the nuts and bolts work, to indulge as we did just a little bit in thinking about the moral implications and what we'd do if we were there. And I think this one's a little murky.
Yeah, it's definitely a little murky. And I think that life and history and culture and all of that gets a little murky sometimes. And to be able to sort of think through it and discuss it and learn from it as best we can is the best possible response to that murkiness.
One thing's for sure, though, the people of the town, there's some trust that still exists there. There's a bond.
Some
trust in each other, even though there's not trust in the system. That's interesting. There's like a profound sense of trust and solidarity amongst the people within the town, even when trust in the system and the government and authority, all of that broke down. They reverted back to what we have as each other.
great stuff, gentlemen.
Yeah, I liked it.
Guys, this was a blast. I mean, I was kind of sheepish in terms of picking this topic. I didn't know if it would be too dark or not. And another thing was, like, there was so much really good journalism about it. I kind of felt like I was in the shadow of people who did a much better job communicating the story, but I think it went pretty well.
I think you did a great job, man.
Well, thanks, guys.
I think so too.